After I lost my house in a flood, I stayed with my son for a few months. Then his wife got pregnant and said, "I don't want this old woman here." My son agreed. "I think it's time you find somewhere else to live." So I moved out. But soon they would too, because I'm the one who bought that house. And I want my tenants out today. What city are you in? Drop it below and subscribe. Ready for an amazing story? Let's begin. You know how they say karma is a dish best served cold? Well, honey, I'm about to serve it on ice. Let me tell you how my own son and his charming wife tried to throw me out like yesterday's garbage, and how I taught them the most expensive lesson of their lives. Oh, and did I mention I'm absolutely loving every minute of it? 3 months ago, Hurricane Helena decided to redecorate half of Cedar Falls, Texas, starting with my neighborhood. And by redecorate, I mean she took my beautiful 2-story colonial home and turned it into something that looked like a demolition derby had thrown a tantrum in my living room. I'd lived in that house for 32 years. Raised my son Caleb there after his father died when he was just 8. Every corner held a memory. Every creaky floorboard told a story. The garden where I grew prize-winning tomatoes? Gone. The kitchen where I'd baked Caleb's birthday cakes for decades? Completely destroyed. Standing in what used to be my front yard, watching my entire life floating down the street, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my husband's funeral. Complete helplessness. At 58, I was starting over with nothing but the clothes on my back and whatever the insurance company decided my memories were worth. "Mom, you can't stay here," Caleb had said, surveying the wreckage. He was 32 now, successful in his accounting firm, married to Meredith for 2 years. "The house is a total loss. You'll have to stay with us while you figure things out." Meredith stood behind him, her perfectly manicured hand resting on her still flat belly. She was 29, blonde, and had the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Of course," she added, though her tone suggested she'd rather invite a nest of hornets to tea. Family helps family. I should have seen the warning signs right there. When someone says, "of course," like they're swallowing medicine, you know you're in for trouble. But I was grateful. My son was offering me shelter when I needed it most. Their house, the house I'd bought them as a wedding gift, but kept in my name for tax purposes, was a lovely 3-bedroom ranch in the newer part of town. Granite countertops, hardwood floors, a guest bedroom that would have been perfect for someone like me, except I wasn't offered the guest bedroom. "Mom, the guest room is Meredith's home office now," Caleb explained as he carried my suitcase toward the basement stairs. "She runs her online boutique from there, but the basement is finished. And we've set up a bed down there. It's actually quite cozy." Cozy. That's what we're calling damp, windowless dungeons now. The basement bedroom was a corner of the unfinished area sectioned off by a thin curtain. The concrete floor was painted gray, and the single bed looked like it belonged in a college dorm room. A small space heater sat nearby, which should have been my first clue about how cold it would get. "This is temporary," I told myself, setting down my suitcase on the metal folding chair that served as my dresser. "Just until the insurance comes through and I can find something permanent." But as I lay on that thin mattress that first night, listening to the water heater gurgle and feeling the February chill seep through the concrete walls, I started to understand my new position in the family hierarchy. I wasn't a beloved mother and mother-in-law staying in the guest room. I was an inconvenience stored in the basement like seasonal decorations. The next morning, I climbed the stairs to find Meredith in the kitchen making coffee in the expensive machine I'd bought them for Christmas. She was wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, scrolling through her phone with one hand while holding a mug with the other. "Morning," I said cheerfully, because I was raised to be polite, even when I wanted to suggest someone reconsider their life choices. She looked up with that practiced smile. "Oh, Lana, I didn't hear you come up. How did you sleep?" "Like a baby," I lied. "A baby with hypothermia, but still." She blinked, unsure if I was joking. "Well, there's coffee if you want some." I poured myself a cup and noticed she'd made just enough for herself and Caleb. Good thing I'm not picky about coffee strength, or warmth, or actually tasting like coffee. "I was thinking," she continued, "since you're here for a while, maybe we should establish some routines, so we're not all bumping into each other." Routines. There's another word that should come with warning labels. "What kind of routines?" I asked, though I suspected I wasn't going to like the answer. Well, I usually have my morning yoga in the living room at 7, so if you could maybe stay downstairs until 8, and I work from home, so the office area is off limits during business hours. Oh, and I'm trying to keep the main bathroom tidy for when Caleb's clients come by, so there's a small bathroom in the basement you could use. I nodded slowly, processing the fact that I was being given rules for living in the house I technically owned. But I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. I was still processing the idea that my son's wife thought it was appropriate to restrict my access to basic facilities in what was supposed to be my temporary home. That sounds reasonable, I said, because sometimes you have to pick your battles, and I was saving my ammunition for the war I didn't know was coming. That's when I realized that this wasn't going to be the temporary arrangement I'd imagined. This was going to be a masterclass in creative humiliation, and Meredith was apparently the professor. If you've never been made to feel like an unwelcome house guest in your own property, let me paint you a picture. It starts small, tiny comments here and there that make you question whether you're being too sensitive. "Lana, did you use the last of the coffee creamer?" Meredith would ask in that sweet voice that somehow made me feel guilty for drinking coffee in general. Or my personal favorite, "Oh, I didn't realize you were planning to shower this morning. I would have showered earlier if I'd known we'd be sharing the schedule." Sharing the schedule. As if basic human hygiene required advanced coordination in a 3-bedroom house. The basement bathroom became my domain by default. It was a tiny space with a toilet, a sink barely big enough to wash my hands, and a shower that had 2 settings, Arctic blast and scalding volcanic eruption. The mirror was cracked, and the lighting made me look like I was auditioning for a zombie movie. But the real genius of Meredith's passive-aggressive campaign wasn't in what she said. It was in what she didn't say. She never actually told me I couldn't eat the food in the refrigerator. She just made sure to mention how expensive groceries were getting and how she was trying to meal prep for the week. When I offered to contribute to groceries, she waved me off with a martyred sigh. "Oh no, don't worry about it. We'll manage." Manage. Like my presence was a natural disaster requiring emergency resources. She never said I couldn't watch television in the living room. She just always seemed to need the space for yoga, or meditation, or important phone calls with clients, or video conferences about her boutique. Somehow, the living room was perpetually needed for activities that required absolute privacy and silence. And she never directly criticized my appearance, but she had a talent for helpful observations. "Oh, that sweater is so vintage. I love how you don't worry about keeping up with trends." Or, "Your hair looks so natural." I admire women who embrace the gray. I started spending most of my time in the basement, partly because it was easier than navigating the social minefield upstairs, and partly because I was beginning to understand that this was exactly what Meredith wanted. Caleb, bless his oblivious heart, seemed completely unaware of the domestic Cold War happening under his roof. He'd come home from work, kiss his wife, ask how my day was, and genuinely believe everything was fine when I said, "Wonderful. Mom seems to be settling in well," I heard him tell Meredith one evening as I sat on the basement stairs, listening to their conversation in the kitchen above. "Oh yes," Meredith replied. "She's very adaptable." Adaptable. Translation: she's learning her place. The truth was, I was adapting. I was learning to shower at times when I wouldn't inconvenience Her Royal Highness. I was learning to make my coffee after she'd finished her morning routine. I was learning to exist in the spaces she didn't need. But I was also learning something else. I was remembering why I'd never particularly liked Meredith, even before this whole arrangement started. During their dating period, she'd been charming enough. Sweet to my face, attentive to Caleb, full of compliments about what a wonderful job I'd done raising such an amazing man. But there had always been something calculated about her warmth, like she was following a script titled, "How to Win Over the Future Mother-in-Law." The mask had started slipping after the wedding. Little comments about how Caleb had been too dependent on me before they got married. Suggestions that maybe he needed to establish boundaries with family. Gentle hints that a newly married couple needed their space to build their own life. I'd ignored it because I wanted Caleb to be happy, and he seemed genuinely happy with her. But now, living under her roof and subject to her rules, I was seeing the real Meredith, And the real Meredith was a woman who viewed other people as either useful or obstacles. Right now, I was definitely an obstacle. 3 weeks into my stay, she escalated her campaign. I came upstairs one morning to find her rearranging the living room furniture. "Oh, good, you're up," she said brightly. "I'm redecorating a bit, making the space more functional for a growing family." She was moving my late husband's reading chair, the one piece of furniture that had survived the flood, the one thing I'd asked to keep in the living room, toward the back wall. "Where would you like me to put this?" she asked, though her hands were already repositioning it in a corner where it would be visible from nowhere except the kitchen doorway. "Actually," I said carefully, "that was James's chair. I'd like to keep it somewhere I can use it." Her smile never wavered. "Of course, but we're trying to create better traffic flow for when the baby comes. You understand? The baby that was barely 6 weeks along and wouldn't be walking for at least 18 months, but who was I to question interior design logic?" I watched her position James's chair in the corner like a museum piece, visible but not accessible, acknowledged but not welcome. It was a perfect metaphor for my entire situation. That night, I called my sister Patricia in Oklahoma. "How's the temporary housing situation?" she asked. "Temporary is the key word," I said, looking around my basement accommodations. Though I'm starting to think Meredith has a different definition of temporary than I do. Meaning she's treating me like an unwelcome houseguest who's overstayed her welcome. And I've been here less than a month. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Lana, honey, are you sure you're not being overly sensitive? Living with family is always an adjustment." And there it was. Even my own sister thought I might be imagining things, which in retrospect was exactly what Meredith was counting on. She was too smart to do anything obviously cruel or clearly unacceptable. Everything she did could be explained away as reasonable, practical, or even considerate. But I knew better. I'd been married for 24 years and raised a child. I understood the difference between someone trying to accommodate you and someone trying to manage you. Meredith wasn't trying to make room for me in her home. She was trying to make me so uncomfortable that I'd choose to leave on my own, which would make me the unreasonable one for abandoning their generous hospitality. It was actually quite brilliant, in a completely diabolical way. But she'd made one small miscalculation. She assumed I was a helpless old woman with limited options and no backbone. She thought she was dealing with someone who would eventually accept defeat and shuffle away quietly. She had no idea she was messing with someone who'd built a successful career, raised a child as a single mother, and survived more challenges than she'd ever faced in her pampered life. And she definitely didn't know about the little legal detail concerning the house she was trying to push me out of. That particular revelation was going to be quite the surprise for everyone. You know that feeling when someone keeps poking you and pretending it's an accident? Well, Meredith had elevated that to an art form. By March, she wasn't even pretending to be subtle anymore. "Lana, I hope you don't mind, but I've converted the basement bathroom into storage for the baby's future nursery items," she announced one Thursday morning, as if she'd just decided to rearrange the spice cabinet instead of eliminating my only private space. I stood there holding my coffee mug, trying to process this latest development. Converted it how? Well, I've been ordering things for when the baby comes, and I need somewhere to store them until we set up the nursery. The basement bathroom isn't really functional anyway. That shower barely works. She wasn't wrong about the shower. I'd been alternating between ice-cold disappointment and third-degree burns for weeks. But it was still my bathroom, the one place in the house where I could have 5 minutes of privacy. "Where am I supposed to shower?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Oh, you can use the main bathroom upstairs. I've cleared out some space under the sink for your things. Just maybe check with me first to make sure I'm not in the middle of anything important." Check with her. To use a bathroom. In the house I owned. I walked downstairs to survey the damage and found the small bathroom stacked floor to ceiling with boxes labeled baby items. Car seats, strollers, high chairs, enough equipment to outfit a small daycare center for a baby that was barely 3 months along. But here's the thing about being systematically humiliated. Eventually, you start paying attention to the details. And the details were telling me a very interesting story. Those baby items? They were expensive. Not just nice, but seriously high-end stuff. The kind of baby gear that costs more than most people's cars. I started doing some mental math based on the brand names I could see, and I was looking at easily $20,000 worth of purchases. $20,000 for a baby that wasn't due until October. Now I knew Caleb made decent money at his accounting firm, but not buy everything at Baby Boutique's money. And Meredith's online boutique was cute, but it wasn't exactly a gold mine. So where was this money coming from? I was pondering this mystery when Meredith herself appeared at the bottom of the stairs. "I know it seems like a lot," she said, following my gaze across the boxes, "but I believe in being prepared. Plus, I got an amazing deal on most of this stuff. It's very comprehensive," I agreed. "You must have gotten some incredible deals." She beamed, clearly proud of her shopping prowess. "I have connections in the industry. People don't realize how much money you can save if you know the right people." Connections. Right. Because I was born yesterday and definitely couldn't recognize expensive baby gear when I saw it. But I just nodded and made appropriate sounds about how lucky the baby would be to have such a well-prepared mother. Because I was starting to form a theory about where this money was coming from, and I wanted to do a little investigating before I jumped to conclusions. That afternoon, while Meredith was having one of her mysteriously important business calls upstairs, I took a walk around the neighborhood, just getting some fresh air and definitely not checking out the for sale signs that had started appearing in front yards recently. Funny thing about small towns, people love to talk, especially to someone they've known for decades. "Lana," called Mrs. Henderson from across the street. "How are you holding up, honey? Heard you're staying with Caleb and Meredith while you get back on your feet." "That's right, they've been very generous." "Oh, that's wonderful. Family taking care of family. That's how it should be." She paused, glancing toward the house. "Speaking of which, I saw a real estate agent here last week. Are they thinking of selling?" My blood went cold. "Selling?" "Well, I just assumed. Young couple, baby on the way, maybe they need something bigger." The agent was taking pictures of the outside, measuring the yard, seemed very thorough. I managed to keep my voice level. "I'll have to ask them about that. Maybe they're just getting an appraisal for insurance purposes." But I knew better. You don't measure yards and take photos for insurance appraisals. I walked back to the house with my mind racing. The expensive baby purchases, the real estate agent, Meredith's increasing urgency to establish routines that kept me out of sight. They weren't just trying to make me uncomfortable enough to leave on my own. They were planning to sell the house and wanted me gone before potential buyers started asking inconvenient questions about the older woman living in the basement. That evening, Caleb came home with Chinese takeout and an announcement that made everything crystal clear. "Mom, we have some exciting news," he said, setting the bags on the kitchen counter. "Meredith and I have been talking, and we've decided to start looking for a bigger place." "Really?" I managed to sound appropriately interested while internally screaming. "With the baby coming, we're going to need more space," Meredith added. "A proper nursery, maybe a playroom, a yard where kids can run around safely." "This house has a yard," I pointed out. "Well, yes, but it's not really big enough for children. And the neighborhood is getting older. We want to be somewhere with more young families." Translation: we want to be somewhere without inconvenient relatives who might have opinions about our life choices. "Have you found anything yet?" I asked. They exchanged one of those married couple looks that spoke volumes. "We're looking at a few places," Caleb said carefully. "There's one in particular that we really like. It's in the new development on the other side of town." "It's perfect," Meredith gushed. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a huge kitchen. Everything we need for our growing family. "Sounds expensive," I said. "Well, that's the thing," Caleb continued. "We'll need to sell this place to afford the new one. The realtor thinks we can get a really good price in the current market." And there it was, the real plan, laid out as casually as discussing weekend plans. They wanted to sell my house to fund their upgrade to suburban paradise, and they needed me out of the way to make it happen. "When were you thinking of listing it?" I asked. "Soon," Meredith said quickly. "The market is hot right now, but it might cool down if we wait too long. Our agent thinks we should move fast." Their agent. They already had an agent. This wasn't a recent decision or a casual conversation. They'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months, while I'd been graciously accepting their generous hospitality. They'd been orchestrating my eviction so they could cash in on the house I'd bought them. "Well," I said, "that sounds like quite an adventure. New house, new baby, new neighborhood. Exactly, Meredith beamed. A fresh start for our family. Our family. Not the family. Our family. A family that apparently didn't include me. I went to bed that night in my basement corner, listening to them discuss staging the house and scheduling photography sessions. They talked about it all so casually, as if I weren't sitting 20 feet below them, as if my living situation weren't directly affected by their plans. And that's when I realized something important. I was done being the grateful, accommodating houseguest. I was done accepting crumbs of consideration in my own property. I was done being managed and maneuvered and manipulated by someone who thought she was smarter than me. Because here's what Meredith didn't know. I might be living in their basement, but this was still my house. Legally, completely, unambiguously mine. And if she wanted to play real estate games, well, I'd been playing grown-up games since before she learned to balance a checkbook. Tomorrow, I was going to remind everyone exactly who held the deed to this little piece of domestic paradise, and I was going to enjoy every single minute of it. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. For weeks, I'd been reacting to Meredith's manipulations, letting her dictate the terms of my existence in what was legally my own house. But that was about to change. I waited until both of them left for work, Caleb to his office and Meredith to whatever she did when she wasn't terrorizing house guests. Then I made a phone call that was long overdue. Peterson Law Firm, this is Janet. Hi, Janet. This is Lana Mitchell. I need to speak with Bill about some property matters. Bill Peterson had handled my legal affairs for 15 years. He'd drawn up the paperwork when I bought Caleb and Meredith's house as a wedding gift, and he'd know exactly what my legal options were. Lana, how are you holding up after the flood? I heard about your house. That's actually what I need to discuss with Bill. How soon can he see me? Let me check. He has an opening this afternoon at 2. Will that work? Perfect. That would give me time to gather some documents and prepare my questions. I'll be there. While I was getting ready for my appointment, my phone rang. It was Meredith. Lana, I just wanted to let you know that the photographer is coming this afternoon to take listing photos. Could you maybe make sure the basement area is tidy and perhaps run some errands while he's here? We want to minimize any distractions. Distractions. That's what I'd become. A distraction in my own home. Of course, I said sweetly. I was planning to be out this afternoon anyway. Perfect. Oh, and one more tiny thing. Could you move your personal items somewhere less visible? Maybe pack them in boxes and store them in the utility closet? Just for the photos. She wanted me to pack up my belongings and hide them in a closet, so potential buyers wouldn't know someone was actually living there. I'll take care of it, I promised. And I would, just not in the way she was expecting. Bill Peterson's office was in an old Victorian house downtown that he'd converted into law offices. I'd always loved the place. It felt serious and established, like the kind of place where important decisions were made and problems got solved. Lana, Bill greeted me with a warm handshake. I've been wondering how you were managing after the storm. Please sit down and tell me what's on your mind. I settled into the leather chair across from his desk and pulled out the folder of documents I'd brought. Bill, I need to review the legal details of the house I bought for Caleb and Meredith. He nodded, pulling up files on his computer. The property on Maple Street. What specifically do you need to know? Everything. Who owns it? Who has the right to sell it? What happens if there's a dispute? His eyebrows raised slightly. Having some family issues? You could say that. Bill spent the next 20 minutes walking me through the legal details. The house was titled solely in my name. Caleb and Meredith had no legal ownership, no equity, and no right to sell it without my consent. I could technically evict them with 30 days' notice, just like any other tenants. The only complication, Bill explained, is that they're family, and they've been living there rent-free for 2 years. A court might require more than the standard 30 days if they contested an eviction. What if they're actively trying to sell property they don't own? Bill's expression grew serious. That would be fraud. Real estate fraud is a felony in Texas. Hypothetically, if someone had already contacted a real estate agent and was planning to list a property they don't own, what would be the legal remedy? Hypothetically? Bill smiled grimly. The actual owner could notify the real estate agent that the listing is unauthorized and potentially fraudulent. the agent would be legally obligated to withdraw the listing immediately. And if the unauthorized sellers had already spent money based on an expected sale that can't legally happen, well, that would be their problem, wouldn't it? I left Bill's office with a clear understanding of my legal position and a folder full of documents that proved my ownership beyond any doubt. I also had the business card of a real estate agent who specialized in properties with complicated family situations. But before I did anything legally dramatic, I wanted to give Caleb and Meredith one chance to be honest with me. I drove back to the house to find a photographer's van in the driveway and Meredith directing a young man with a camera around the property. She was dressed in her most professional outfit, playing the role of homeowner for the photos. "Oh, Lana," she called when she saw me. "You're back early. We're just finishing up the exterior shots." "Wonderful," I said. "Mind if I watch?" The photographer was good at his job, capturing the house's best angles and making the yard look larger than it actually was. He spent extra time on the front entrance and the landscaping, the kind of shots that would make buyers fall in love before they ever stepped inside. "This is such a beautiful property," he commented to Meredith. "You've really maintained it well." "Thank you," she beamed. "We've put a lot of love into it." Love. And my money, but who's keeping track? After the photographer left, Meredith was practically vibrating with excitement. "The photos are going to be gorgeous," she gushed. "Mark says he can have the listing up by tomorrow evening. We should start seeing showings by the weekend." "That's very efficient," I agreed. "The market is so hot right now. Mark thinks we'll have multiple offers within a week." "I hope you get everything you deserve," I said, and meant every word. That evening, Caleb came home to find Meredith and me having a surprisingly pleasant conversation in the kitchen. She was showing me paint samples for their potential new house, talking about nursery themes and kitchen renovations. "How did the photography go?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Perfect," Meredith replied. "Mark says the listing will be live tomorrow night. He's optimistic about the market response." Caleb nodded, but I caught something in his expression, a flicker of uncertainty, maybe even guilt. "Mom," he said carefully, "we should probably talk about your living situation. I mean, once we start showing the house." "I understand," I said. "You'll need the place to look its best for potential buyers." "Exactly. And with strangers coming through, it might be uncomfortable for you anyway." How thoughtful. Worried about my comfort while planning to sell my house without telling me. "Where were you thinking I might go?" I asked innocently. They exchanged one of those married couple looks again. "Well," Meredith said slowly, "there are some really nice senior living communities in the area, places designed for people who want to downsize and simplify their lives. Senior living communities. At 58, because apparently surviving a natural disaster made me elderly. That's an interesting idea," I said, "though I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of lifestyle change." "Mom," Caleb said gently, "maybe it's time to consider something more practical. I mean, after losing the house and everything, maybe this is an opportunity for a fresh start. A fresh start, also known as get out of our way so we can profit off your generosity." "You know what?" I said, standing up from the table. "You're absolutely right. It is time for a fresh start." They both smiled, clearly relieved that I was being so reasonable about my own displacement. "I'm glad you're open to exploring options," Meredith said. "Change can be scary, but it can also be liberating." "Oh, I'm feeling very liberated," I assured her. "In fact, I've never felt more free to make exactly the choices I want to make." That night, as I lay in my basement corner, listening to them celebrate upstairs, I thought about liberation and fresh starts and getting exactly what you deserve. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day, and by interesting, I mean I was about to teach two people a lesson about assumptions, real estate law, and the dangerous game of underestimating someone who has absolutely nothing left to lose. Friday morning arrived with all the promise of a beautiful spring day. Birds were singing, flowers were blooming, and I was about to drop a legal bombshell that would rearrange my son and daughter-in-law's entire world. But first, coffee. Because you should always be properly caffeinated before you destroy someone's life plans. I was in the kitchen at 6:30 a.m., earlier than usual, humming softly while I made breakfast. When Meredith came upstairs for her morning routine, she found me making pancakes and setting 3 places at the table. "Oh," she said, clearly confused by this domestic display. What's the occasion? No occasion. I just thought it would be nice to have a family breakfast before your big day. Big day? The house listing goes live today, right? That's exciting. I wanted to celebrate. Her smile was cautious but pleased. That's very sweet of you, Lana. I appreciate you being so supportive about everything. When Caleb came down, he was equally surprised to find a home-cooked breakfast waiting. Wow, Mom, this is nice. What's gotten into you? I've just been doing some thinking, I said, serving them each a stack of pancakes. About fresh starts and new beginnings, and I realized you're absolutely right. It is time for some changes. They dug into breakfast with the enthusiasm of people who thought they'd successfully managed a difficult situation. Meredith chatted about the real estate agent's marketing strategy. Caleb discussed the timeline for their new house purchase. I listened and nodded and made appropriate comments while mentally reviewing my conversation with Bill Peterson. Actually, I said when they'd finished eating, I have a little announcement of my own. They both looked at me expectantly. I've decided to take your advice about making some changes. You're right that I need to be more proactive about my housing situation. That's wonderful, Mom, Caleb said. Have you found some places to look at? In a way, I said, I've decided to reclaim the house. Silence. Complete baffled silence. Meredith was the first to speak. Reclaim what? The house. This house. My house. I pulled out the folder of documents Bill had prepared for me. It seems there's been some confusion about ownership. Caleb's face went pale. Mom, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that this house is titled in my name. It's been my property since I bought it as your wedding gift 2 years ago. I spread the deed and title documents on the table between the breakfast plates, which means any attempt to sell it without my consent would constitute real estate fraud. Meredith's fork clattered to her plate. But you gave it to us. I gave you the use of it. I never transferred ownership. There's quite a big difference, legally speaking. Caleb was staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. I don't understand. Why didn't you ever mention this? Because it wasn't relevant until you decided to sell my house to buy a bigger one. I kept my voice calm and pleasant, as if we were discussing weekend plans instead of felony fraud. Now it's very relevant. Meredith had recovered from her initial shock and was shifting into damage control mode. Lana, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We never intended to do anything inappropriate. We just assumed. You assumed I was a helpless old woman who would shuffle off quietly while you profited from my generosity. I can see how you'd make that mistake. That's not what we thought at all, Caleb protested, but his voice lacked conviction. No? Then why didn't you discuss your plans with me before contacting a real estate agent? Why did you hide the listing preparations? Why did you ask me to pack my belongings in boxes so potential buyers wouldn't know someone lived here? The kitchen fell silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock and the distant sound of the refrigerator humming. This has all been a huge misunderstanding, Meredith said finally. We were trying to surprise you with our news about the new house. We thought you'd be excited about the fresh start. By lying to a real estate agent about your authority to sell property you don't own? Caleb found his voice. Mom, we can work this out. We're family. We don't need lawyers and legal documents. Actually, we do, because you've already spent money based on an anticipated sale that can't legally happen. Mark, the realtor, is expecting to list this property today. What are you going to tell him? They stared at me with the expression of people who just realized they'd been playing chess while someone else was playing checkers with dynamite. What do you want from us? Meredith asked quietly. I want honest communication. I want to be treated with respect in my own home. And I want you to understand that your living situation here is entirely dependent on my generosity, not your right. Are you evicting us? Caleb asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. I could see the fear in his eyes, the realization that his entire life plan was built on a foundation that didn't actually belong to him. That depends, I said, gathering up the legal documents. Are you planning to treat me like an unwanted burden you need to eliminate? Or like the property owner who's been subsidizing your lifestyle for 2 years? Mom, please, can we start over? Can we handle this like adults? I looked at my son, 32 years old, successful in his career, married, expecting his first child, asking me to give him another chance like he was 8 years old and had broken something valuable. That, I said, is entirely up to you. I left them sitting at the breakfast table, surrounded by dirty dishes and legal documents that proved their entire real estate scheme was built on lies and assumptions. My phone was already ringing as I walked toward the basement stairs. Bill Peterson, right on schedule. Lana, I just got off the phone with Mark Stevenson at Premier Realty. Seems there was some confusion about a listing that was supposed to go active today. What kind of confusion? The kind where the people trying to sell the house don't actually own it. I faxed him the title documents an hour ago. He's withdrawing the listing immediately and wants nothing more to do with your son and daughter-in-law. And the photography? Mark's keeping the photos in case you decide you do want to sell. But he's making it very clear that any future listing will require your signature, not theirs. Upstairs, I could hear raised voices. Meredith's carefully modulated tones were giving way to something sharper, more desperate. Caleb was asking questions that apparently didn't have good answers. Bill, I may need those eviction papers after all. I'll have them ready by Monday. But Lana, you might want to give them the weekend to come to their senses. Sometimes people make better decisions when they understand the consequences. I spent the rest of Friday in my basement corner, listening to the drama unfold above me. Phone calls to the real estate agent. Frantic discussions about backup plans that didn't exist. Long, tense conversations about money they'd already spent and commitments they'd already made. By evening, they'd stopped talking altogether. That's when I knew the real education was about to begin. Because teaching someone about consequences isn't just about revealing the truth. It's about letting them sit with that truth until they fully understand how completely they'd miscalculated. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we'd start negotiating the terms of their continued residence in my house. This was going to be fun. In Lana's Sweet Revenge, chapters 6 to 10. Saturday morning dawned with the kind of silence that comes after explosions. You know, that eerie quiet when everyone's still processing exactly how much damage has been done. I made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table like I owned the place, which, as we'd recently established, I absolutely did. The house felt different now that the truth was out, less like a battlefield and more like my territory. Caleb appeared first, looking like he'd spent the night wrestling with his conscience and losing badly. His hair was disheveled, his eyes were red, and he had the general appearance of someone who'd discovered his life was built on quicksand. "Morning," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "Good morning, sweetie. Sleep well?" He poured coffee with shaking hands. "Mom, we need to talk." "We certainly do, but let's wait for Meredith. I'd hate for anyone to miss the conversation." 20 minutes later, my daughter-in-law made her entrance. Gone was the polished, confident woman who'd been ordering me around for months. This Meredith looked smaller somehow, like someone had let the air out of her superiority complex. "Lana," she said carefully, "I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday." "Did we?" "I thought we finally got on the right foot for the first time since I moved in." She sat down across from me, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl called to the principal's office. "I want you to know that we never meant any disrespect." "Really?" "Because telling me to pack my belongings in boxes and hide in closets felt pretty disrespectful. But maybe we have different definitions of respect." Caleb cleared his throat. "Mom, we messed up. We know that. But we're family. Can't we work this out?" "Of course we're family. That's exactly why I'm so disappointed." I took a sip of coffee, letting that sink in. Family doesn't lie to each other about real estate transactions. Family doesn't try to profit off tragedy. Family doesn't treat each other like inconvenient obstacles. "You're right," Meredith said quietly. "We handled everything wrong." "Yes, you did. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" They looked at each other with the desperate expression of people trying to figure out how to unbreak something that was thoroughly shattered. "What do you want us to do?" Caleb asked. "Well, for starters, you can call Mark the realtor and explain that you lied about owning the house. Then you can figure out how to pay back whatever deposits you've already put down on your dream house. Then you can explain to me why I should let you continue living in my property after you tried to steal it." Meredith's face crumpled. "We never thought of it as stealing. We thought you'd given it to us." "No, honey. You thought I was too stupid to understand the difference between a gift and a loan. There's a distinction." The next hour was like watching a controlled demolition. They made the phone calls, each one more humiliating than the last. Mark the realtor was professional but cold. He'd been burned by clients who didn't own the properties they wanted to list, and he wasn't interested in their explanations. The builder of their dream house was less understanding. They'd already put down a $15,000 deposit, and the contract had penalties for backing out after the planning phase had begun. "How much money are we talking about in total?" I asked when they'd finished their calls. Caleb pulled out his phone calculator. "The deposit on the new house, the real estate agent fees we already agreed to pay, the staging consultant Meredith hired," he looked sick, "about $28,000. $28,000 you spent based on selling a house you didn't own. When you put it like that, it sounds really bad," Meredith whispered. "Honey, it doesn't just sound bad. It is bad. It's consult with a bankruptcy attorney bad." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could see them both doing math in their heads, trying to figure out how to dig themselves out of a financial hole they'd created through their own arrogance and dishonesty. "Mom," Caleb said finally, "what would it take for you to help us with this?" And there it was, the question I'd been waiting for. Not, "How can we make this right?" or "How can we earn your forgiveness?" but, "What will it cost to make this go away?" "Oh, sweetie," I said, "this isn't about money anymore. This is about trust and respect, and the fact that you two conspired to kick me out of my own house so you could profit from my generosity." "We know we screwed up," Meredith said, tears starting to flow. "But we're going to have a baby. We can't lose everything." The tears were real, and part of me felt sympathy for her. But a bigger part of me remembered the months of basement exile and passive-aggressive humiliation. "You should have thought about that before you decided I was expendable." "Please," Caleb said, "tell us what we can do to fix this." I looked at my son, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died, the man I'd been so proud of, and made a decision that surprised even me. "You can start by treating me like a human being instead of an obstacle. You can acknowledge that I own this house, and you live here because I allow it. And you can understand that your continued residence here depends entirely on whether I feel respected and valued." "Of course," Meredith said quickly. "Absolutely. I'm not finished." I held up my hand. "You can also explain to me how you managed to spend $20,000 on baby equipment when you're supposedly struggling financially." Another silence. This one had a different quality. The silence of people who'd been caught in a lie they'd forgotten they'd told. We used credit cards," Caleb admitted. "Credit cards for $20,000 worth of baby gear? We thought we'd pay them off when the house sold," Meredith said quietly. "So you ran up massive debt based on money you expected to make from selling property you didn't own. Is that an accurate summary?" They nodded miserably. "Well," I said, standing up from the table, "this is certainly educational. I'm learning so much about your decision-making process. Mom, please, what can we do?" I looked around the kitchen, my kitchen in my house, where I'd been made to feel like an unwelcome guest for months. "You can start by moving my belongings back upstairs." "I'll be taking the master bedroom." Their faces went blank with shock. "The master bedroom," Meredith repeated. "It's the largest room in my house. I think it's appropriate for the property owner, don't you? But where will we sleep? You can have the guest room, the one that's been serving as your office. I'm sure you can find somewhere else to run your boutique business." I could see them processing this reversal of hierarchy. For months, I'd been the one adapting to their rules, accepting smaller spaces, making accommodations. Now they were learning what it felt like to have someone else set the terms. "And the baby?" Meredith asked. "When it comes, the baby can have the third bedroom. You know, the one you were planning to convert into a nursery anyway. But all the baby furniture is in the basement bathroom. Then I suggest you find somewhere else to store it. I'll be needing that bathroom back." They sat there absorbing the new reality. Instead of moving into a bigger house, they'd be consolidating into a smaller space. Instead of being the decision makers, they'd be the ones seeking approval for changes. Instead of managing an inconvenient house guest, they'd be the guests themselves. It was a beautiful reversal, and I was enjoying every minute of it. "Any questions about the new arrangement?" I asked sweetly. "Mom," Caleb said carefully, "are you sure this is how you want to handle this? I mean, we're going to be raising a child here." "Yes, you are. In my house, according to my rules, with my permission. I suggest you start thinking about how to make that work for everyone involved." I left them sitting at the kitchen table, contemplating their dramatic change in circumstances, As I walked upstairs to survey my new accommodations, I could hear the beginning of what promised to be a very long conversation about their limited options. The master bedroom was gorgeous, spacious, bright, with a walk-in closet and an ensuite bathroom I'd been admiring since they moved in. It was going to be a significant upgrade from my basement corner. But the best part wasn't the space or the amenities. The best part was knowing that for the first time in months, I'd be sleeping in my own house as the owner rather than the charity case. And tomorrow, we'd start negotiating the terms of their continued residence in my property. I had a feeling it was going to be very educational for everyone involved. Sunday morning brought a knock on my new bedroom door, something I never thought I'd experience in my own house, but here we were. "Come in," I called, not bothering to get out of bed. Because when you're the property owner, you get to receive visitors in your pajamas if you want to. Caleb entered, carrying a breakfast tray with coffee, toast, and what appeared to be an attempt at scrambled eggs. His effort was touching, even if his culinary skills needed work. "Peace offering," he said, setting the tray on my nightstand. "How thoughtful. What's the occasion?" "Meredith and I stayed up all night talking. We want to make this right." I sat up against the pillows, enjoying the luxury of a real bedroom with actual windows and adequate lighting. "I'm listening. We know we messed up. Badly. And we know you have every right to be angry with us. That's a good start." He pulled up the chair from my vanity table and sat down like he was visiting a patient in the hospital. "We want to propose a formal arrangement, something that works for everyone." "Formal how?" "A lease agreement. We pay you rent, we have clear boundaries about responsibilities and expectations, and everyone knows where they stand." I sipped the coffee, which was actually quite good, and considered this development. "Rent? You want to pay me rent to live in the house I bought you?" "Yes, it's the right thing to do." "And what brought about this sudden attack of appropriateness?" Caleb had the grace to look embarrassed. "We realized that you've been subsidizing our entire lifestyle for 2 years. The house, the utilities, the property taxes. You've been paying for everything while we treated you like an unwelcome guest." "Go on." "We called Mark yesterday to officially cancel the listing, and he mentioned what our house would rent for in the current market. $1,500 a month, maybe $1,800 for a place this nice." I nearly choked on my coffee. "You're offering to pay me rent?" "We're offering to pay fair market rent, and we want to sign a real lease with terms and conditions that protect everyone." This was an interesting development. For months, they'd been planning to profit from my property. Now they were volunteering to pay me for the privilege of living in it. "What kind of terms and conditions?" I asked. "Whatever you think is appropriate. We've been researching landlord-tenant law, and we understand that you have rights as a property owner that we've been ignoring." "Such as?" "Such as the right to approve any modifications to your property, the right to access all areas of your house, the right to establish house rules and expectations for behavior." I set down my coffee cup and studied my son's face. This was either a genuine attempt at making amends or the most sophisticated manipulation I'd ever encountered. "And what about the $28,000 you owe?" His shoulders sagged. "We're working on that. We've contacted a financial advisor about consolidating our debt and setting up a payment plan. Without using the proceeds from selling my house." "Without using proceeds from selling your house," he confirmed. There was something different about him this morning. The entitled confidence that had characterized his behavior for months was gone, replaced by something that looked like actual humility. "Where's Meredith?" I asked. "Downstairs making lunch. She wanted to cook for you as an apology." "How domestic of her." "Mom, she's really sorry. We both are. We got carried away with planning for the baby and forgot that none of this would be possible without your generosity." I finished my breakfast in contemplative silence while Caleb waited for my response. The smart play would be to negotiate terms that protected my interests while allowing them to rebuild their financial stability. The emotional play would be to make them suffer a little longer for their betrayal. I was leaning toward a combination of both. "I'll consider your proposal," I said finally, "but I have some conditions of my own." "Anything." "First, a formal lease with a security deposit and references, just like any other rental arrangement." "Done." "Second, I maintain complete control over any modifications or changes to my property." "Absolutely." "Third, I expect to be consulted about any major decisions that affect the household, including but not limited to guests, pets, and noise levels." "That's fair." "And fourth," I paused for effect, I want a written apology acknowledging what you did and promising that nothing like this will ever happen again. Caleb nodded slowly. We can do that. Good. Now go help your wife with lunch, and we'll discuss the details this afternoon. After he left, I lay in bed enjoying the morning sunlight streaming through my windows and contemplating the dramatic shift in power dynamics. 3 days ago, I'd been living in a basement corner, subject to Meredith's passive-aggressive rules. Today, I was a landlord, negotiating lease terms with tenants who'd finally learned to respect property ownership. It was quite a remarkable transformation. The lunch Meredith prepared was impressive. Roast chicken with herbs, roasted vegetables, fresh bread that smelled like it came from a bakery. She'd clearly invested serious effort in this peace offering. This is delicious, I told her as we sat around the kitchen table. Thank you. I wanted to show you that I appreciate everything you've done for us. Everything I've done? Buying us this house, letting us live here rent-free for 2 years, taking us in when we needed help, even though we didn't handle it well. This was a version of Meredith I hadn't seen before. Humble, grateful, acknowledging my contributions instead of treating them as invisible. And now? I asked. Now we want to be proper tenants instead of ungrateful relatives who took advantage of your kindness. That's quite a change in perspective. We had a lot of time to think yesterday about what we did, about how we treated you, about how we've been living above our means while you subsidized everything. Caleb pulled out a folder of documents. We've drafted a lease proposal based on fair market rent for a house this size in this neighborhood. I reviewed their proposal while they waited nervously. $1,800 a month, plus utilities, with a security deposit equivalent to 2 months' rent. Standard lease terms with clauses about property maintenance, noise restrictions, and approval for modifications. It was professional, fair, and completely different from the entitled behavior they'd exhibited just days earlier. This looks reasonable, I admitted. We also wanted to discuss the debt situation, Meredith said carefully. We know we owe money we don't have, and we want to be transparent about how we're handling it. I'm listening. We've canceled all the baby purchases that haven't been delivered yet. That saves us about $12,000. We're returning everything we can from the basement, which should get us back another $3,000. And the rest? We're negotiating with the builder about the deposit. He's agreed to let us transfer it to a different lot if we build within 2 years, so that money isn't completely lost. I was impressed despite myself. They'd spent their weekend cleaning up a financial mess that could have destroyed their credit and their future. What about the immediate expenses, the real estate fees and staging costs? We're taking out a personal loan to cover those. It's not ideal, but it's better than defaulting on the obligations. And your monthly budget? With the rent payment to you, we'll be living a lot more modestly. No more expensive restaurants, no more shopping sprees, no more spontaneous purchases. We've calculated that we can make it work if we're careful. This was the conversation I'd been hoping for since the beginning. Not excuses or manipulations, but honest acknowledgement of their mistakes and concrete plans for fixing them. There's one more thing, Caleb said hesitantly. What's that? We want to pay you back for the 2 years of free rent. We know it's not legally required, but it's morally required. I nearly dropped my fork. You want to pay me retroactive rent? We've calculated what we should have been paying, adjusted for market rates at the time. It comes to about $32,000. And how exactly do you plan to pay $32,000 when you're already dealing with debt consolidation? Payment plan. We're thinking $50 a week until it's paid off. $50 a week for $32,000 would take them over 12 years to repay, but it was a gesture that showed they understood the magnitude of what I'd given them. That's a very long commitment, I observed. Yes, it is. But we think it's important to acknowledge what we owe you, even if it takes years to pay it back. I looked across the table at these 2 people who'd spent months treating me like an inconvenience and realized they were finally beginning to understand the value of what they'd been given. Let me think about all of this, I said. Of course. Take all the time you need. But I was already thinking about something bigger than lease agreements and retroactive rent. I was thinking about family and forgiveness and the difference between punishment and education. And I was starting to form an idea that might surprise everyone. Monday morning, I had an appointment with Bill Peterson to review the lease proposal. But first, I had some research to do. While Caleb and Meredith were at work, I spent the morning making phone calls and gathering information about things that might matter more than rent payments and security deposits. My first call was to Dr. Sarah Martinez, Meredith's obstetrician. "This is Lana Mitchell. I'm Meredith Walker's mother-in-law, and I wanted to ask about scheduling for after the baby arrives." "Of course, Mrs. Mitchell. Meredith mentioned you might be helping with childcare." Interesting. Meredith had mentioned me helping with the baby, but she'd never actually asked me about it. I wanted to understand what kind of support new mothers typically need. Dr. Martinez spent 15 minutes explaining postpartum care, the importance of family support, and the challenges young parents face in the first few months. It was enlightening conversation. My second call was to Cedar Falls Elementary School. "I'm calling to inquire about enrollment procedures for families moving into the district." The administrator was helpful, explaining school zones, registration requirements, and the differences between schools in various neighborhoods. Our address, it turned out, was in the district for one of the best elementary schools in town. My third call was to Patricia in Oklahoma. "How's the housing situation?" she asked. "Improving. They've offered to pay rent." "Well, that's progress. Are you going to accept?" "I'm considering something more complicated than that." I explained the situation, the debt, the attempted fraud, the sudden change in attitude, and their offer to make financial amends. "So what are you thinking?" Patricia asked. "I'm thinking about the baby." "The baby?" "This child is going to be my grandchild, Patricia. My only grandchild, probably. And right now, its parents are drowning in debt they created through their own stupidity. Are you thinking about helping them financially?" "I'm thinking about helping them grow up." That afternoon, I met with Bill Peterson to review their lease proposal. "It's a fair document," he said after reading through it. "Standard terms, reasonable rent for the property, appropriate protections for both parties. But it doesn't address the bigger issue, which is the fact that you're dealing with family members who betrayed your trust, not strangers who need housing." Bill leaned back in his chair and studied me. "Lana, what do you really want out of this situation?" "I want my son to become a man I can respect again. I want my daughter-in-law to understand that relationships are built on mutual consideration, not manipulation. And I want my grandchild to grow up in a household where integrity matters." Those are big goals. Yes, they are, which is why I'm thinking about something more comprehensive than a rental agreement. Such as? I pulled out the notes I'd made during my morning phone calls. Such as a family contract that addresses financial responsibility, household management, and child-rearing expectations. A family contract? Think of it as a lease agreement for relationships. Clear expectations, defined responsibilities, consequences for violations, and rewards for compliance. Bill's eyebrows went up. "That's creative. They want to make amends? Fine. Let them prove it over time, not just with monthly rent payments." "What kind of provisions are you considering?" "Financial transparency. No major purchases without discussion. Shared household responsibilities based on contribution rather than gender assumptions. Respectful communication standards. Mutual decision-making about anything that affects the property or the family. And if they violate the terms, then we renegotiate or they find somewhere else to live." Bill was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. "It's unconventional, but it might be exactly what they need. Clear boundaries, defined expectations, and accountability for their behavior. Plus, it addresses the real issue, which isn't whether they can pay rent, but whether they can be trusted to act like responsible adults. Do you think they'll agree to something that comprehensive?" "They will, if they want to continue living in my house and raising my grandchild with my support." That evening, I called a family meeting. Caleb and Meredith sat at the kitchen table with notebooks and pens, like students preparing for an important exam. "I've reviewed your lease proposal," I began, "and I have some thoughts." "We're ready for whatever changes you want to make," Meredith said quickly. "Good, because I want to make significant changes." I spread out my own documents on the table. Instead of a simple rental agreement, I'm proposing a comprehensive family contract that addresses not just housing, but the broader relationship between us. They looked confused. "What kind of family contract?" Caleb asked. "An agreement that establishes expectations for financial behavior, household responsibilities, communication standards, and child-rearing decisions. Think of it as a roadmap for how we're going to function as an extended family sharing the same space. That sounds intense, Meredith said. It is intense. Because what happened over the past few months was intense. You tried to steal my house and throw me out like garbage. That level of betrayal requires a comprehensive response. We understand that, Caleb said. But what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that you earn back my trust through demonstrated behavior over time, not just through rent payments. I walked them through my ideas, monthly financial meetings where all expenses and debts are discussed openly, shared household tasks allocated based on contribution rather than assumption, joint decision-making about anything that affects the property or the family, and regular family meetings to address issues before they become problems. And the baby? Meredith asked. The baby gets the benefit of grandparents who are involved, supportive, and committed to providing stability rather than being treated like inconvenient strangers. So you want to be involved in parenting decisions? I want to be acknowledged as a family member whose opinions matter, not dismissed as an old woman whose views are irrelevant. They spent an hour asking questions and taking notes. The contract I was proposing was more complex than a simple landlord-tenant agreement, but it addressed the real issues that had caused our problems. Can we have some time to discuss this? Meredith asked. Of course, but understand that this is my offer. You can accept it, modify it through negotiation, or reject it and find somewhere else to live. And if we accept, then we become a real family instead of people who happen to share DNA and living space. After they went upstairs to discuss my proposal, I sat in the kitchen, my kitchen, in my house, and thought about second chances and earned forgiveness. They'd spent months treating me like an obstacle to their happiness. Now I was offering them the chance to build something better than what they'd had before. Whether they were smart enough to recognize the opportunity would tell me everything I needed to know about who they really were. Tuesday evening brought the answer to my proposal. Caleb and Meredith knocked on my bedroom door at 7 o'clock, looking nervous but determined. We've made a decision, Caleb said. I set down my book and gave them my full attention. I'm listening. We accept your terms, Meredith said. All of them. Even the parts about shared decision-making and monthly financial meetings? Especially those parts, Caleb replied. We realized that half our problems came from making major decisions without talking to each other, let alone talking to you. And the accountability provisions? We want accountability, Meredith said. We want to prove that we can be the kind of people who deserve your trust and support. This was promising, but I'd learned not to trust their words without seeing their actions. Show me, I said. They exchanged glances. Then Caleb pulled out a thick folder. We've spent the last 2 days creating a complete financial disclosure, he said. Every debt, every asset, every monthly expense, everything you'd need to understand our situation. He handed me spreadsheets that detailed their income, expenses, debts, and projected budget with rent payments included. It was thorough, honest, and slightly horrifying. You're spending $1,200 a month on restaurants and entertainment? I asked. We were, Meredith said. We've already canceled the expensive subscriptions and committed to cooking at home. And this credit card debt? From the baby purchases and general overspending. We've consolidated everything into a payment plan that fits our budget. I reviewed their numbers with the eye of someone who'd managed household finances for decades. They'd been living like people who made twice their actual income, but their proposed budget was realistic and sustainable. This is quite a change in lifestyle, I observed. It's a change we should have made years ago, Caleb admitted. We got caught up in trying to look successful instead of actually being responsible. And you're prepared to live this way long term? We're prepared to live within our means, Meredith said. With a baby coming, we can't afford to be careless with money anymore. There's something else, Caleb added, pulling out another set of documents. We've been thinking about the bigger picture. What bigger picture? The fact that we're going to be raising a child in this house, your house, and we want that child to grow up understanding values like honesty, responsibility, and respect for family. Meredith nodded. We want our kid to learn from the best grandmother possible, not from parents who were too proud to acknowledge their mistakes. So we've created a parenting philosophy document, Caleb continued. Our ideas about how we want to raise this baby, with input from you as an involved grandmother. I read through their parenting document with growing surprise. They'd thoughtfully considered questions about discipline, education, extracurricular activities, and family traditions. More importantly, they'd included specific roles for me as an active grandmother, not a babysitter or occasional visitor. "This is very comprehensive," I said. "We want to do this right," Meredith said. "All of it. The finances, the family relationships, the parenting. We want to be people you can be proud of. And what happens if you slip back into old patterns? Then you hold us accountable," Caleb replied. "That's part of what we're asking for. Someone who cares enough about us to call us out when we're making mistakes." I studied their faces, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. What I saw instead were two people who genuinely learned from their mistakes and were committed to becoming better. "There's one more thing," I said. "What's that?" "The retroactive rent, $32,000 over 12 years. We're prepared for that commitment." "I'm not." They looked confused. $50 a week for 12 years is a punishment, not a solution. It keeps you focused on past mistakes instead of future success. "Then what do you suggest?" I pulled out my own document, one I'd been working on since our conversation started. "I suggest we establish a college fund for the baby. Instead of paying me retroactive rent, you contribute $50 a week to your child's education." Their mouths fell open. "In 12 years, that's $32,000 plus interest, which should provide a solid foundation for college expenses. Your child benefits from your commitment to making amends. And you learn to prioritize long-term financial planning." "You want us to save money instead of paying you back?" Meredith asked. "I want you to invest in your child's future instead of dwelling on your past mistakes." Caleb was staring at the college fund proposal like it was written in gold. "Mom, this is incredibly generous. It's practical. Your child is going to be my grandchild. I have a vested interest in making sure they have opportunities. But what about the money we owe you? Consider it a gift, a wedding gift that I'm finally officially giving you, along with a baby gift for my future grandchild." Meredith started crying. Not the manipulative tears I'd seen before, but genuine emotion. "Lana, I don't know what to say. Say you'll be the parents this child deserves. Say you'll be the adults I know you can become. Say you'll treat this family with the respect and honesty it deserves." "We will," Caleb promised. "All of it." "Then let's sign some papers and make this official." We spent the next hour reviewing documents, signing agreements, and establishing the framework for our new family dynamic. The rental lease with reasonable terms, the family contract with accountability measures, the college fund with automatic contributions. But more importantly, we were establishing something that had been missing for months: trust. "There's one last thing," I said as we finished with the paperwork. "What's that?" "I want to redecorate this house for a baby." "Redecorate?" "New paint in the nursery, baby-safe modifications throughout the house, maybe some new furniture in the living room so we have comfortable seating for family time." "That sounds wonderful," Meredith said. "But expensive." "That's my concern, not yours. This is my house, my grandchild, and my investment in our family's future." "Mom," Caleb said quietly, "why are you being so generous? After everything we did?" I thought about that question while I looked at these two people who'd made terrible decisions but were working to become better. "Because family forgives," I said finally. "And because I want my grandchild to grow up in a house filled with love, not resentment. And because," I added with a smile, "I'm really looking forward to spoiling that baby absolutely rotten." For the first time in months, we all laughed together, real laughter, not the careful politeness that had characterized our interactions. Tomorrow, we'd start the work of becoming the family we should have been all along. But tonight, for the first time since I'd moved into this house, I felt like I was home. 6 months later, I'm sitting in the nursery of my house, holding my 3-week-old granddaughter Emma, and marveling at how completely my life has transformed. The room is painted in soft yellow with white furniture I picked out myself. Caleb built the shelves, and Meredith chose the curtains that filter the afternoon sunlight into gentle gold. It's beautiful, it's peaceful, and exactly what I'd imagined when I dreamed about having grandchildren. But the real transformation isn't in the decor, it's in the family. Caleb has become the responsible adult I always knew he could be. He manages the household finances with the precision of an accountant, which makes sense since that's what he is. Every month, we have our financial meeting where he shows me spreadsheets and budgets and savings goals. The college fund for Emma already has nearly $3,000 in it, growing steadily with their weekly contributions. Meredith has surprised me the most. The entitled princess who once ordered me to pack my belongings in boxes has become a thoughtful young woman who asks my advice about everything from baby feeding schedules to career planning. Her online boutique has actually grown into a profitable business, partly because she's learned to manage expenses and partly because she's focused on building something sustainable instead of just looking successful. But the biggest change is in how we treat each other. Yesterday, Meredith brought me coffee in bed. Not as an apology or obligation, but because she wanted to chat about Emma's sleep patterns and get my thoughts on introducing solid foods. We spent an hour talking like friends, sharing observations about this tiny person who's brought so much joy into our lives. Last week, Caleb asked if I'd be interested in co-signing a lease for a larger business space for Meredith's boutique. Not because they needed my money, but because they wanted my input on the business plan and valued my experience with financial decisions. We spent an evening reviewing projections and discussing growth strategies like business partners. The family contract we signed 6 months ago has evolved into something none of us expected. Not a list of rules and restrictions, but a framework for healthy communication. We still have monthly family meetings, but now they're opportunities to plan vacations, discuss household improvements, and coordinate schedules. The accountability measures I insisted on have become habits of transparency that benefit everyone. Emma is the center of it all, but she's not the only reason things changed. The real transformation happened when 3 adults decided to treat each other with honesty and respect instead of manipulation and entitlement. "How's my favorite granddaughter?" I ask Emma, who responds by making the tiny squeaking sounds that apparently pass for conversation when you're 3 weeks old. "Your only granddaughter," Meredith corrects from the doorway, smiling as she watches me with the baby. "Details," I reply. "She's still my favorite." Meredith settles into the rocking chair beside me. "Lana, I want to tell you something." "What's that?" "I was talking to my mother yesterday, telling her about how we're raising Emma, and she said something that made me think." "Oh?" "She said she wished she'd had the courage to set boundaries with my father's family the way you set boundaries with us." I look up from Emma's tiny face. "Meaning?" "Meaning you didn't just forgive us for treating you badly. You taught us how to treat you well, and how to treat each other well, and how to be the kind of people who deserve forgiveness." "That's very insightful of your mother. I used to think you were being harsh with all the contracts and accountability measures. Now I realize you were being loving in the most practical way possible." Emma makes another squeaking sound, and we both laugh. "Being loved and being enabled are 2 very different things," I say. "I wanted to love you enough to help you grow up." "Mission accomplished," Meredith says. Though I have to ask, did you always plan to be this generous? With the house, the college fund, all of it? Honestly, I had no idea how this would turn out. I just knew that the old way wasn't working for anyone. And if we hadn't changed, if we'd kept being awful, then you'd be looking for somewhere else to live, and I'd be a very sad grandmother who only saw her granddaughter during supervised visits. Caleb was right when he said you were scarier than any landlord could ever be. I prefer motivational, I say. The front door opens downstairs, and we hear Caleb's voice calling out, "I'm home! Where are my girls?" "Up here," Meredith calls back. He appears in the nursery doorway still wearing his work clothes, his face lighting up when he sees Emma in my arms. "How was the princess today?" he asks, kissing Meredith hello and then gently stroking Emma's cheek. "Perfect, of course," I reply, though she did have some very strong opinions about her afternoon feeding schedule. "She gets that from her grandmother," Caleb says, grinning at me. "Which grandmother?" Meredith asks innocently. "All of them, probably." We spend the next hour doing the evening routine we've developed. Caleb changes into comfortable clothes. Meredith starts dinner, and I supervise Emma's pre-dinner nap. It's domestic and ordinary, and absolutely wonderful. During dinner, Caleb mentions that his firm is considering promoting him to senior accountant, which would come with a significant salary increase. "That's fantastic," I say. "You've earned it." The extra money would let us accelerate the college fund contributions, Meredith adds. Maybe double them. Or, Caleb suggests, we could start contributing to a house fund. I pause with my fork halfway to my mouth. House fund? For when we're ready to buy our own place, he explains. I mean, not anytime soon. But eventually, Emma's going to need her own space, and you deserve to have your house back. This is my house, I point out. And right now, I like having my family in it. But eventually, we'll see what makes sense for everyone involved. Right now, this arrangement works beautifully. Are you sure? Meredith asks. I know having a baby in the house is a lot of noise and chaos. I look around the dinner table, at my son who's become a man I can respect, at my daughter-in-law who's become a friend I genuinely enjoy, at my granddaughter sleeping peacefully in her carrier. I spent months living in the basement of my own house, feeling like an unwelcome burden. Now I'm living upstairs as the matriarch of a family that actually values my presence. This is exactly where I want to be. Even with 3 a.m. feedings and crying babies? Caleb asks. Especially with 3 a.m. feedings and crying babies, those are grandmother privileges. Later that evening, after Emma's bedtime routine, and after Caleb and Meredith have gone to their room, I sit in the living room with a cup of tea and think about the journey that brought us here. 6 months ago, I was a displaced flood victim living in my son's basement, being systematically humiliated by people who thought they could manipulate me into disappearing quietly. I was angry, hurt, and honestly, a little lost. Tonight, I'm a homeowner, a landlord, a grandmother, and a family member who's genuinely respected and valued. The house is quiet, except for the occasional sound from Emma's room, little sighs and movements that remind me there's new life growing up under my roof. Tomorrow, Meredith and I are going shopping for Emma's first Halloween costume. Caleb is planning to carve a pumpkin for the front porch. We're hosting Patricia for Thanksgiving, and she's excited to meet her great niece. It's the kind of ordinary family life I thought I'd lost when the flood destroyed my house, and I ended up dependent on the generosity of people who didn't want me around. But sometimes, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's transformation. I didn't just reclaim my house. I reclaimed my family. And in the process, we all became better than we were before. My phone buzzes with a text from Patricia. How's grandmother life treating you? I look around my living room, my house, my rules, my family, and type back, like exactly the adventure I didn't know I needed. And as I head upstairs to my bedroom in my own house, I smile thinking about tomorrow's plans and next week's family meeting and all the years of granddaughter spoiling that lie ahead. Sometimes life gives you floods and betrayal and basement exile,